Over the past few years, BRICS nations have been quietly amassing a significant stockpile of gold, totaling approximately 600 tons. At the same time, former U.S. President Donald Trump made a striking declaration regarding international trade. He announced that the United States would impose a punitive tariff of no less than 100% on any economic dealings with nations that sought to challenge the supremacy of the U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, BRICS has been actively working on a decentralized blockchain-based system aimed at reducing dependence on the U.S. dollar in global transactions. The world is witnessing a strategic shift, with BRICS pushing back against the financial dominance of the United States. This move raises pressing questions about the future of the U.S. dollar's role in international markets. Halfway through his term, Trump issued a clear ultimatum. Any BRICS country that supported or developed an alternative currency designed to compete with the U.S. dollar would face immediate repercussions. These included a 100% tariff and a permanent exclusion from the American market. Trump framed this policy as a critical economic boundary, one that no country would be permitted to cross without severe consequences. He insisted that the U.S. dollar was not merely a currency, but a fundamental representation of America's influence on the global stage. It was a legacy that had been cultivated over decades, and he was determined to defend its supremacy at any cost. This stance was not a one-time warning. Trump reiterated his position multiple times across social media platforms, demonstrating his firm commitment to safeguarding the dollar's global financial dominance. However, BRICS was quick to respond, with Brazil taking the first step in direct defiance of these warnings. In 2024, while serving as the rotating chair of BRICS, Brazil openly dismissed Trump's warnings and unveiled ambitious plans to extend the capabilities of PIX, its national digital payment platform. This system, which already served over 150 million users domestically, was set to expand into international transactions. At the same time, Brazil introduced the SML, a cross-border payment framework that facilitated transactions using the Brazilian real. This system bypassed the U.S. dollar entirely and was initially employed for transactions with Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. Though still in its early stages with moderate processing speeds, Brazil was actively integrating advanced real-time payment technologies. The ultimate goal was to create a system that was efficient, rapid, and most importantly, independent of the U.S. dollar. This initiative was not just a domestic experiment. It marked a significant challenge to the U.S. dollar's central role in international trade. Furthermore, Brazil was not acting alone. The shift away from dollar reliance was quickly becoming a shared objective among BRICS nations, and an even more ambitious project was underway, a unified financial system called BRICS Pay. Rather than limiting themselves to regional payment systems, BRICS member states were progressively building a worldwide financial infrastructure. BRICS Pay was envisioned as a decentralized, blockchain-based trading network that would allow participating nations to conduct transactions directly, eliminating the need for SWIFT, the backbone of the U.S. dollar's financial stronghold. Simultaneously, BRICS was developing a new reserve currency intended to replace the dollar in cross-border trade. However, perhaps the most striking move was their rapid acquisition of gold. In just 2 years, BRICS countries discreetly accumulated more than 600 tons of gold. Unlike traditional reserves stored for prestige or security, this gold was being acquired as a financial safeguard. It was intended to shield these nations from external monetary manipulation in a world where the dollar no longer dictated economic power. And Brazil was not alone in these efforts. Other BRICS nations were making similarly bold moves to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar. China and Brazil had agreed to conduct trade settlements in their own currencies, the yuan and real, completely bypassing the dollar. Russia and Iran had connected their banking networks to conduct bilateral transactions without using SWIFT. Meanwhile, India and Russia were now trading oil in rupees and rubles, and South Africa had ramped up its use of the Chinese yuan for transactions with Beijing. The most defining moment came when BRICS expanded its membership, welcoming new entrants such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Indonesia, and Egypt. This development signified a crucial turning point. Emerging economic powers were no longer willing to be bound by a financial structure built and controlled by the United States. Instead, they were working toward a multipolar financial order in which the U.S. dollar would become just one option rather than the default global currency. Ironically, the very threats of sanctions and tariffs meant to protect the dollar had inadvertently accelerated this global financial realignment. The ramifications of these U.S. policies were becoming evident. Within 24 hours of Trump's announcement of the 100% tariff, financial markets reacted negatively. The Nasdaq fell by 2%, the S&P 500 dropped over 1%, and the GDP forecast from the Atlanta Federal Reserve projected a 1.8% contraction in the first quarter of 2025. This raised fears of an impending economic downturn, possibly even stagflation. Investors were beginning to ask a critical question: had the U.S. dollar been transformed into a political weapon? If global confidence in the dollar were to wane, it would not be BRICS that suffered the most. The real damage would be felt by the United States itself. This financial shift was happening against a backdrop of broader geopolitical tensions. In 2024, Tesla lost 14% of its market share in Norway, a country at the forefront of the electric vehicle revolution. At the same time, the European Union warned it would retaliate against America's new tax policies. In a surprising move, Canada also began sourcing military equipment from Europe rather than the U.S. During a high-profile meeting with NATO's Secretary General, Trump harshly criticized the European Union's trade policies. He expressed frustration over Europe's reluctance to import American agricultural products and automobiles, while the U.S. market remained open to European cars from brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen. The U.S.-EU trade relationship was substantial, exceeding $1.2 trillion annually. However, Europe had erected barriers against American agricultural exports and automobiles while continuing to benefit from favorable conditions in the U.S. market. Trump specifically targeted what he called unfair tax benefits granted to Apple in the EU, escalating tensions with key economies such as Germany and France. Tesla, a symbol of American innovation, faced growing criticism in Europe. In Denmark, a major academic pension fund divested all of its Tesla shares, citing issues related to labor agreements and governance. Pension Denmark withdrew 400 million kroner after Tesla refused to comply with Swedish labor regulations, leading to widespread strikes and disruptions to its operations. Elon Musk's political stance also contributed to Tesla's declining reputation in Europe. His endorsements of controversial right-wing parties in Germany, the UK, and other European nations alienated many consumers. In Norway, Tesla's market share dropped from 21.7% to just 7.4% within a year, and public perception of the brand deteriorated significantly. Meanwhile, Canada was quietly forming closer economic and defense ties with Europe. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly confirmed that the country was finalizing discussions to acquire European military equipment, including Saab Gripen fighter jets from Sweden. This shift aimed to reduce Canada's reliance on U.S. defense supplies amid growing concerns over Washington's trade policies. The EU-Canada Free Trade Agreement, CETA, had already boosted trade between the two regions by 60% since its implementation in 2017. As Canada sought to diversify its export markets, currently 75% dependent on the U.S., it was increasing collaborations with European partners in research, technology, and sustainable energy. In response to Trump's new tariffs, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated that the EU would take strong retaliatory measures against what it viewed as unfair trade practices. European leaders were considering imposing counter-tariffs on products from pro-Trump U.S. states as a means of pushing back against protectionist policies. With these economic and political shifts, the global order appeared to be realigning. Was the world witnessing the beginning of a broader movement away from U.S. financial hegemony? These developments suggested that both Europe and Canada were forging new alliances, signaling that a major transformation in the global economy was underway. I have shared my opinion, but what do you think? Leave your comment, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. See you soon.